Health of It, a podcast where you will discover creative ways to improve your health and well-being. Someone may have told you that art isn't for you, but they were wrong. Anyone can create arts for the health of it. No talent or experience necessary.
I'm just a little songbird, try to fly my way homeward with the melody, and I make the beat. Don't know where it'll take me, cause when I'm in the dark of night, I sing my way back to the light. Come along with me and your heart will see that a song changes everything. Oh, oh, oh.
Hi, everyone. Happy, what day is it? Monday? Is it Tuesday? What day is it? It's Monday. Welcome to Arts for the Health of It. We're live on Facebook and YouTube, and I believe Twitter, with a whole bunch of people. If you're watching this live right now, our screen is full, and they're here to also take your questions. So if we're live and you have questions for anybody on the panel today, make sure you use the comments to ask away, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them. I am Richard Wilmore, your host.
And I'm Constanza Rader, your other host.
And I want to first kind of start off with Joyce, introduce you to Joyce. Everyone here on the panel is here to talk about a book called When Home Is Not Safe. And Joyce, can you tell us where that book came from? There we go. I'm going to attempt to make you bigger so people can see it. That's me. That's not fun. There. How about that? That's better.
So, I'm kind of dyslexic, but here we go. When Home Is Not Safe, Writings on Domestic, Verbal, Emotional, and Physical Abuse is an anthology put together by two women, Judith Skillman and Lynera Lucas. They put out a call for submissions about 2 years ago, or a little like last 2 years ago, January. And so it's taken 2 years to get the book together. And the anthology was published in September with McFadden Books, but you can find it on their website, and it can order it through your local bookstore. And the book is cataloged in different sections. The 5 sections are home, trauma, PTSD, and in retrospect. 4 sections. And so all of us here today have a piece in one of those particular sections of this anthology.
Thanks for that introduction, Joyce. I would love to go around the room now and just have y'all share a little bit about who you are and what a little bit about your contribution to this book. And Joyce, you want to go first?
Of course, sure.
Yeah.
So I'm a former professor. I currently live in West Virginia, and I wrote a memoir called The Out of Body Girl. It's not published yet, but it's about my experience with domestic violence and dissociation. And I'm excited to be in this anthology and to share any ideas with our audience today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joyce. Who should we kick it to next, Richard?
I'm going to let's see, we'll go down the list. Robert.
Sure. So my name is Robert, and my piece is a memoir called My First Online Love, and it showcases how domestic violence can occur within the disability community.
Wow, thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Let's see. The names are so small when there's so many people. RK.
Hi there. I'm a Pittsburgh-based writer and social worker. I work with youth coming out of foster care, helping them build life skills. I also co-host Deep in the D-Pad, which is a podcast that explores video games through an intellectual lens with my buddy who is a video game developer. And my piece is called Holy Days. It's a poem. It's relatively short, so I'm not gonna spoil it. That's what you read the book for, right? But yes, it's about domestic violence, occurring from the perspective of a child.
Wow. Thank you. Lynn, you're up.
Lynn.
Hi, I am Lynn Magill. I'm located near Seattle, Washington. I'm an author, technical writer, and artist. And a lot of my work, especially the two pieces in this book called Michael and You Smiled, which are nonfiction. I write quite a bit of nonfiction that talks about my childhood as the only daughter of an alcoholic and drug dealer, and how those things impact your childhood and your normal meter is kind of broken, and the process of reconciling that as an adult. So a lot of my pieces deal with that rearview mirror of looking back and hopefully giving other people hope that there is healing, there is a process, and you can transform some good out of those things.
Beautiful.
And let them know they're not alone.
Thank you, Lynn.
Christina.
All right, Christina.
Okay. I'm Christina Hoag. I'm a journalist and author, and my piece in the book is a personal essay, creative nonfiction, I guess, about my experience getting out of the abusive relationship that I was in some years ago. And I'm also a facilitator in a domestic violence support group, where I once went to for help, many years ago. And now I've been trained as a domestic violence counselor, and I'm a volunteer facilitator at that support group.
Wow.
So
very
part
cool.
of giving back and raising awareness about domestic violence, which I think is so much more pervasive than we think it is.
And you've come full circle to be on the other side and serving. That's awesome. Guess we just have Heidi left.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heidi Seaborn. I'm also a Seattle-based writer and predominantly a poet, but I also write essays, and I'm an editor. And I have two poems in this anthology. The first one is actually the first poem in the anthology, and it's called Weather. And it's about living with domestic abuse. And then there's another poem within called Drafting a Flight Plan, which is, as I think the title implies, about getting out. And so I'm very delighted to have work in this really important anthology.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And I love the description about this book. I'll just read this if you'll allow me. The poems, memoirs, and creative nonfiction pieces collected here tell of real incidences of abuse, as well as of those who left destructive and unsalvageable relationships. The beauty and truth of the language, as well as the honesty and courage, set this anthology apart from self-help manuals and academic treasuries on domestic violence. This book offers a path forward to healing, health, and fulfillment, using the power of art to give voice where a voice has been stifled, forgotten, overlooked, or denied. And of course, that's what we are all about here, and like featuring at Arts for the Health of It is how we can use the arts to advance, improve our health, to advance social causes and issues. And what a beautiful example of this. And thank you guys all for your courage, for sharing your art with the world and your expression of such vulnerable situations and instances in your life, and to share them with others to help elevate this really important conversation. So thank you all for being here and for sharing.
It was brought up a little bit ago about feeling alone and during things like this. What does it feel like to all, because we were talking before we went live about you, if you all knew each other or not, and none of you have. So how does that feel to kind of be all in the same virtual room today?
It makes the book more alive for me to see these faces of other writers. So it's really very moving, to be honest. And I think it's so important to give face to individuals who have experienced this, because people aren't just the victims in their stories; they're the heroes of their stories. So that's what this meeting has been for me. It's very exciting and very healing to see other people speaking their stories and their truths. So thank you for this.
Thank
And
you.
I know there were some other people who were supposed to be on today that were having connection issues, and so I wanted to apologize that they're not able to jump on. But hopefully, when we figure that out, they can come on and talk at a later date, because it's a great conversation to have. Did I
One of the
freeze?
things that impressed me about this anthology is how jam-packed it is. There's not a lot of white space. The pieces run from one to another, which is unusual in anthologies, but I think is indicative of the subject matter, the sort of the density and sadly universality of the experience. And so I encourage viewers to pick up this anthology and read it, and you'll be sort of amazed. You've got to stop from time to time and just take a breath. It's overwhelming, and to be in a space with others visually and emotionally is really powerful.
Thank you, Heidi.
I like to take a moment, and I know some of you wrote in your pre-interview form that you'd have some things to show the audience and to do for the audience that they can put into their everyday lives. So if we can take Joyce for a minute, and Joyce wants to offer a breathing technique, and I think that would be a great thing to maybe throw in right now as something, because this is a very heavy subject, and so I want to give everybody the space that they need, and I think now would be a great time.
Okay, great. This may be very obvious, but I always forget it. And I was recently writing an article about a woman who'd been killed in a domestic violence situation, and I was going through major PTSD. So I reached out to some friends, and one particular friend said, remember this breath, this specific way of breathing. So it's simply to quiet yourself, breathe in 4 counts. What's the word I'm looking for? Breathe in 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4, and just repeat that cycle. Breathe in 4, hold 4, exhale 4 counts, and then hold again. And it really helped bring my blood pressure down and just help me get grounded so I can continue to do the work that I want to do. As difficult as our writing is, it's important to do, but to also keep ourselves healthy in the process. So that's a breathing technique that has worked for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Joyce.
Thanks.
I just did like a couple of those, and that felt really good.
Oh, good.
Thanks for sharing.
I love things that you only need like a minute to do to like completely change your entire day. I love that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Go ahead, Richard.
I do have a question, because I want to know how you all came to be writing for When Home Is Not Safe. Was this something that you found, like people, they were looking for entries, or did they come to you? I'm curious how this actually came about.
They were looking for entries online. And I already had a couple of pieces that I had written that I felt would be a good fit, since I'm also working on a memoir like a few other people, and had a couple of selections that I went, oh, yep, that would definitely be applicable here.
Thank you,
That
Lynn.
was basically the same with me as well.
Kind of an open call, and then you guys we gathered the anthology together. Well, and I love I love this idea of using the arts to express and elevate this topic. Would anyone like to share about what you personally got out of writing your story and then seeing it all the way to that point of being published and other people seeing your story? What role did writing play in your journey?
RK, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll give this one a try. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, writing about such, traumatic subject matter is challenging. And I often approach specifically poetry from like when I'm in a really low place. That's often when I'll, reach for a pen or a keyboard and try to make something out of it, and there is something cathartic about being able to do that. And then, when I have some space from that like emotional pain, I will revisit, and that's when I'll kind of get the revision in. I want a kind of a more objective eye in order to be able to like look at the piece and, see it without all that, burden. But I think for me, one of the things that I'm most grateful for with writing is the forgiveness that I've been able to have for the people, who have committed wrongdoings to me or around me. There's like an empathy building, right? Where I have to, if I'm, let's say I'm looking at a specific situation, and I'm really scrutinizing it to try to understand all, everything that had happened, and try to suss out, poetic details or something. To be able to like perspective take and really see it from someone else's point of view, and perhaps understand that they were ignorant at a certain point in their life, and that if it's a person that you've had a long relationship with, right, you can track them over time and you can understand who they were at different phases, and it doesn't excuse the abuse at all. I should make that very clear. But it does provide insight, and that can be really helpful and therapeutic.
That's beautiful. Does anyone else want to chime in on that question?
Yeah, sure. I'll go. So for me, it was extremely cathartic, getting to do a heck of a lot of introspection, because there is kind of a stigma that domestic violence, it only impacts those who are not disabled. So it allowed me to do some heavy introspection, and to shove aside some of the internalized ableism that I had about domestic violence and society at large, and really examine the roots of abuse in a disability community, possibly, and learn that abuse doesn't discriminate, but on the basis of getting published and my message out there, it was extremely cathartic for me, knowing that my truth was easily accessible for others to examine, and like if it helps other people, then hip hip hooray. So
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Robert. Yeah, it seems like people probably have an image of in their head of what domestic abuse is or looks like, maybe informed by the media or just what their personal experience might be. But like you said, Robert, it's not just one type of person that experiences abuse. And it's a great reason to put together an anthology like this, from showing perspectives from people from different backgrounds and experiencing different type of domestic abuse. So thank you for sharing and including your story, Robert.
Thank you for reading.
Was there anyone who saw the post and thought, now is the time for me to have a voice about this, or had you all been writing about your experience beforehand?
Good question.
So I had written the poems that appear in this anthology I'd written before, and in fact had published previously, but I think I hadn't sort of thought about them as much, and I knew what the subject was, but to then have them within this larger collection of work, I think makes it very sort of clear what's going on. And I wanted to address sort of the what happens when you're able to write, to sort of Richard's comment, but the idea of writing and using, in my case, using form to drive, to sort of propel the poem forward and contain the issue. And in the case of my poem Weather, which opens the anthology, it's in a ghazal form, which is an Arabic love poem form, and so it completely kind of perverts that form, but the form works in terms of creating that sort of sense of entrapment and repetitiveness. And so I think, I think that the act of writing, the act of publishing, whether it's for the first time or publishing again and again, also helps. And so I was quite grateful to have this poem surface for actually, I think, a third time. So because I think it's important, and it also is that sense of the experience resurfacing over and over.
Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I had written about my experience in fiction, actually, a novel, and it's a young adult novel, and it's sort of loosely inspired by my experience. It's called Girl on the Brink. And the reason I wrote that, as fiction, because I didn't want to write nonfiction. It was just too raw and painful. And I was able to then, fiction allows you to take that step back, and, it's happening to someone else, basically, the character in your book. So by the time I saw this, it was this call for submissions. I thought, well, this is the next step, that I'm able to write about my experience in actually what happened to me, not to my character, not to my fictional character. So this was kind of it was a new thing for me to write about it. The reality, the truth of it. So it was, and it worked. I mean, I think it just helps you process it, and it helped me process it as something that just happened to me. It's just another of my experiences in life, because that's what it is ultimately. It's just something that happens to you in life. It doesn't define you in any way.
And I would like to add that one of the reasons that this calls for submissions was really attractive for me. I had been writing about my life, which is it's a roller coaster in and of itself. But whenever I would submit or look for places to submit these very raw and personal things, the calls for submissions, they seemed incredibly hyperbolic in terms of the kind of raw pieces they wanted. So rather than just saying we want your truth on X and Y matter, I kind of had the sense that they wanted a certain kind of truth that they could easily market, which was bizarre to me. So when I saw this, I was instantly drawn, because there was no frills, no like, we want writing that glitters on each and every page with exquisite emotion and things like that. So yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on what Christina said, and this might be helpful to listeners, is that often it can be very helpful to tell your story first in the form of fiction. My memoir started off as a novel, that I worked on for a number of years. And then I had made the decision to turn it into a memoir. And when this call came out, that was sort of a propelling moment for me to really take every chapter and how can I really bring every chapter more to life by turning this into a memoir. So this particular opportunity with the anthology allowed me, it kind of inspired me to really get back in and revise the book and own my truth. There's nothing wrong with fiction. You don't ever have to turn a piece of fiction into creative nonfiction if you don't want to. But for me, it was very empowering to say, yes, this is actually my life. And it was easier to just tell the truth than to try to put all the pieces of a fiction piece together to create truth. I just found for myself, just tell the story and own it. And it's been a real transformative experience, I would say.
And for me, I had written an entire novel for National November Writing Month before I started formally publishing, and I just dumped it all, got a giant draft out there because it took a while to realize that, into adulthood, to go, oh, hey, maybe some of this stuff wasn't normal. And then after I wrote my memoir, I kind of sat on it, and I'm still sitting on it, but I didn't really know what to do with it from there, and I wasn't quite ready to tell those stories publicly. I wasn't sure how to navigate some of the people being talked about still being alive. And, how I wanted to deal with that fallout, if any, responses, possible family responses, those type of things from other individuals. And so I just kind of sat on it. And then when I decided to go back and get my master's, that was such an awesome writing program that they engaged us with a lot of other writers as well. And many of them write nonfiction also about their personal experiences. And we were able to talk to them and say, how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile telling your truth publicly? What happens if somebody reads it? What's happened to you? And I also had to get over some of my own internal fears as some of that negative critical talk we get in our heads as to, who wants to hear me whine about the stuff that happened to me? Who wants to hear a middle-aged woman play a victim? Who's going to read that? And as I started reading my peer stories and other things, I realized there was a place for that, and that a short snippet in time of nonfiction does not define me as, it's not an all or nothing fallacy, where you're a victim just because you write a piece about something that happened to you. So it was also helped me with an emotional process, and getting in touch with the writing community and the right people helped me reconcile a lot of those things about putting it out there.
Anyone else want to hop on that question?
I just want to add something. It's tremendous cathartic to write about your experiences about trauma. And there's actually been psychological studies done about people who write about their trauma actually have longer and better recoveries from that trauma than people who don't write about it. And which I thought was really interesting when I read that. So I think this is, I think this is just a tremendously healing and healthy thing to do.
Yeah, that sharing, there's something really powerful about sharing our stories and externalizing, our stories and what we've been through. I'm curious who you want to read this book. Who would you want to read this book, and what do you want them to get out of it?
I'll start with that. So there's two specific audiences I would love to have read this book. And one is people who have been in similar situations, who haven't been able to tell their story. And I think our stories might be able to give them the courage maybe to think about if they want to do that and how that might help them. But also, and this is a more difficult audience, is reaching this particular audience is abusers. I'm not sure how to reach that audience, to be honest, but I think I can speak to one abuser I know who did the work and has turned his life around as a result. And I think part of how he was able to do that was to step into seeing other people's perspectives. And this book allows a reader to do that, to see the other perspective and to see the consequences of abusive behavior. So that's an audience I would love for this book to reach. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Joyce. Who else?
And to piggyback on what Joyce said, I would like family members also to read it as well, or anybody who has had someone reach out to them and say, this is something I've struggled with, so they can better understand their experiences, even if they haven't been through it. I've got something going on in my life right now with a relative who's going through something, and I have never had their personal experiences, but I've been, researching and reading articles and going, okay, this is, what it's like for them, and how can I better support them and, not discount their experiences or trivialize them.
That's so good, Lynn, because I think sometimes when we're close to someone that's dealing with trauma or has come through trauma, sometimes they're not yet in a place to articulate what they've been through so that you can understand what they've been through and how to support them. And while no one group is a monolith and each person responds to different traumatic events differently, I think what you're saying, Lynn, when what you've done with your loved one is really good insight for people. Like, we can learn from we work with a lot of cancer patients. And so, if someone has been diagnosed with cancer, like, read cancer memoirs, read articles written by people who have survived those types of traumas. And same goes for domestic abuse. I even wonder, like, if I feel like there's, and maybe some of you might have some insight on that. I wonder if there's a lot of abusers, people that are abusing people out there that don't know that they're abusive. And do you think that maybe some of the stories you share in this book might help them even self-identify that some of the behaviors they're doing are abusive and do have this type of negative impact on people in their lives? Just curious.
I'll step in. I think abusers actually do know what they're doing. They're very conscious that they pick people, usually with, maybe not very strong boundaries. I think that's the thing that comes up most often. And they select who their target is, and they very consciously go after them. And again, it's all about control. It's a pathological need for control is what drives this. What drives that? I don't know. There's many books and there are some studies and books about that. Different personalities tend to gravitate toward abusiveness, such as narcissism, borderline personality. Obviously, substance abuse is another big thing. But abusers, they know what they're doing, they'd make a choice in doing that. So it would be really interesting if they did read about abuse. And I know there are, domestic batterers programs that when people get charged with domestic violence charges in court, they get sent to batterer programs, which have some success and some not. But, and they try to again, it's about empathy, having empathy about your victim. So anything such as reading some of these experiences that engenders empathy towards the victim, I think is a really, really useful thing.
I would like to piggyback off of that a bit and kind of say, like, I think when you're talking about abusers, I think you mean the ones who are not just doing abusive things, either consciously or subconsciously. I think you're talking about like a pattern of learned behavior that is manifested into a personality disorder or something like that. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, I think that's yeah. Heidi, looks like you and there's so many people unmuting. Go.
No, it's fine. I think I want to sort of jump on what Robert's saying, and because I'm not certain that people that are abusers always know because in some cases it is part of sort of deep rooted personality issues, and that's part of the way it manifests is in not acknowledging and gaslighting and whatever, so I think the more people that can read the stories, and that's the wonderful thing about art and about a show like this, is that it helps bring these stories into other forums where people can encounter them and maybe see themselves either as on one side or the other of these stories, as a victim or as an abuser.
Yeah, I see this more on a spectrum of self-awareness in terms of abusers, because some families have this ancestral history of abuse, and some people, I believe, just understand they believe that is how the world functions. I mean, I believed that being abused was how the world functioned. So I think I see the situation of abuse on a more, I don't think there's any black and white on it. I think some abusers are flat out manipulative, and others, I think it can be seen as more of generational trauma that repeats itself, and that the perspective is, this is the way life works.
One of the things that comes to mind when you're speaking about this is the debate that's really prevalent in parenting circles over the last several years about spanking versus not spanking, and all of this research coming out about spanking essentially being an adverse childhood event. And but then there's this strong pushback of parents who I assume love their children and want to do the best thing for them, but that's the only thing that they've known. It's the only way of parenting that they've known. And so there's this resistance to the data because their lived experience is different than what the data is saying, or at least they're like, oh, well, I'm not affected by this. But I think I know sometimes reading other people's stories of healing who have been through, like y'all going through this process of doing the hard work of introspection and looking at those painful parts of your heart that were wounded, and dealing with it authentically and honestly, stripping away all the things that we do to avoid looking at those tender places of ourselves, and then you're putting them on display. And then I know when I've read other people's accounts of things that I've dealt with that I maybe not as far on the journey, it helps me recognize, hey, that what I experienced was abuse. And you're right. That wasn't okay. And so and again, I just applaud you guys for your courage and for putting it all out there for people to see and learn from and identify with. It's really good.
Has anyone used any of the other arts to express themselves? Obviously, for this book, you've all written about it, but I know we have some musicians in the room and we have some visual artists. So I'm curious who, or maybe another art form was what you originally started with, but now you're writing about it.
We're looking at you, RK.
Yeah, I play a little bit of ukulele, and by a little bit, I mean I don't record my music or anything like that. It's just it has been, just I guess as an aspect of my personal life, it's been helpful to have different outlets and different areas of the arts to draw upon. Music and writing really don't feel very similar to me at all. Like we have this umbrella term of the arts, and they're both creative endeavors, but one is sonic, and one is visual or conceptual, and so to be able, for me, it's been very helpful to be able to pull upon different aspects, and both certainly have been linked with my own healing.
Thanks, RK. I know we have some other artists in the room.
This is Joyce. I'm also a visual artist, and I've done all kinds of different projects where I've used visual art to tell the stories of my issues with domestic violence and sexual abuse. So one of them is the 100-Day Project, where you just choose. What I did was I chose a word every day, and this word was bruise, and then I would do I would only let myself work on it for 30 minutes, so that it wasn't going to take up my whole day, and I wasn't going to get totally lost in the feelings of it. But then I would write a little story on the back about what the word I had chosen. Oops, that was skin. Sorry, not bruise, but I painted a bruise. And just wrote about skin and what the skin I had in the game. And sometimes I've done another series where I chose different lines from like fairy tales and things. This particular line was from Alice in Wonderland. It's no use now to pretend to be two people. And because I deal with being out of body a lot, I draw myself on the ground and up in the air. And it's just a way of visualizing and seeing and expressing the experiences in a way that gets it out of your body. And I find like doing that daily has been really healing for myself.
Wow. And you didn't have to spend, that's not an additional hundreds of dollars in therapy. That's you with it's
a small piece of paper and some cheap watercolor. Yeah.
That's awesome.
As a visual artist, it's fun to reconcile art with that, because when you've experienced abuse, you can tend to be a little bit reactive and not really in the moment. And so I use a lot of my art. I don't use it to express a lot of the abuse itself, but I use it to slow down and get into the moment and notice details and almost do that breath work that Joyce talked about. It helps me to do that and notice some of the more beautiful and positive things and my way of putting some joy back into the world. Although I'm writing a chapbook right now of poems called Quilts, and photographing some of the quilts I've sewn and writing about the emotional experiences and some of the conversations about those and some of the metaphors in that. And I did a portrait of my grandfather, who's a very controversial figure. I painted one of him. And I let the tones and the angles kind of express some of that drama and harshness of his personality, but also some of the wry humor he had as well. And I did one dog portrait of grief of a dog that we lost about 1.5 years ago. But most of mine tend to be more healing for myself than outward expression.
Yeah. Anyone else want to hop in on that?
I just want to say we have a class at the domestic violence shelter that we do called Toolkit, and it's a 12-week, 2-hour every Saturday thing. And a lot of that deals with art therapy, and the clients love it. They just love it. And it just involves things like watercolors on paint, glitter, just basic sort of art supplies, very cheap art supplies. And the clients really love that art therapy.
Yeah. So good. So good. And I think you touched on, several of you have mentioned it's sometimes hard initially to verbalize, at least directly, what you're experiencing. And I think someone mentioned something about art kind of being the safe container is kind of referred to. And I think that's one of the powers the arts have, is sometimes when things feel too threatening and overwhelming to our nervous system, it gives us these other avenues and other ways to express ourselves that aren't quite as direct and threatening, so that you can eventually get to the place where you can be direct.
Yes.
I want to know what it feels like, because I think a lot of people write or they do art, they do it to sort of, you could stay a little more anonymous. You don't have to throw your name out there, but here we all are with your names and we're talking about it. How does that feel? Kind of a full circle moment of like, now you're not just writing about it, you're talking about it. And I don't know if that feels different or if that's exciting, or how that feels for everyone.
I will go. It feels incredibly exciting because you get to, I mean, not only do you get to have supportive writers around you, you get to process it in real time. So, yay.
That's
Mm.
awesome. Thanks,
I'm
Robert.
not going to lie, it feels a little vulnerable.
Mhm.
And sometimes you worry a little bit about being re-traumatized by people who might get a little judgy, or at least I do personally.
Mhm.
But for me, my business brain did a risk versus reward. Somebody else had to put themselves out there for me to read about it and do my own healing. And so if I can put myself out there so that somebody else doesn't have to go down as far down this path before they start realizing what's going on, and that helps even one person, it's absolutely worth it.
Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say I totally agree that it is kind of scary. But when you think about it, that domestic violence has such stigma to it, and it is so criticized. That victim blaming is really what goes on.
Yeah.
So anything I can do to put out there to show the truth of it, or at least try to explain, it's a very complex sort of syndrome or behavior pattern, that hopefully it'll help someone out there. And if it's one person, then I've done my job. And I do know that from speaking about this in public, I've actually done public speaking about it, and also from speaking about my book, I always have people coming up to me afterwards saying, that happened to me. Thank you for telling your story. That happened to my sister, my mother, my daughter. It's incredibly, it's so pervasive in our society. The problem is people are afraid to speak up about it because they're afraid of being judged, and they're afraid of being criticized. And so I think that, the more that we can do just this little bit, putting out an essay, a poem about it, that can help someone and help break down that stigma and that judginess. Hey, I'm going to do it.
I agree. I think that's the whole point of this book. I'm really hoping this book gets a large audience. I haven't received responses from anyone from this particular essay in this book, but I have had other essays published, and I can't tell you how many women have reached out and emailed me to say, I know I'm not alone now. And that's, to me, that's the goal of this book. And I really hope that this book makes its way in the world and finds its audience so that they can also speak their stories and just know that they're not alone.
Beautiful. Thank you, Joyce.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to hop on that? Richard has the next question.
No, I was just going to say, I know we promised you like an hour and a half ago that this would only take a half an hour. So I don't want to take up your entire day. But I don't know if anybody has any final words or if Sanzi has any final questions before we let you all go about your day. But I can't thank you enough for coming on and chatting with us.
Just thank you for giving us this space. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was a lovely and safe conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you felt that way. Thank you for all helping to facilitate that. Good stuff. Go buy this book.
Yes.
So good.
Joyce, can you throw it? Let me make you a bigger screen. Throw it up one more time. The book is When Home Is Not Safe. It's available, I'm assuming, on Amazon and all the things.
Right. Yes. And your local bookstores.
Yes. And the McFarland and Sons website directly.
Right.
Yes.
Awesome.
Great.
Sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's all backwards on this thing. It's very strange. Yes. But it
Thank
looks
you
perfect.
so much.
Thank you all very much for being
here.
Yes,
thank you.
If you're watching or listening, make sure you're subscribing wherever you're doing that. We have new episodes every week. We thank you very much for being here. Keep creating, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Arts for the Health of It. a podcast produced by Hearts Need Art, creative support for patients and caregivers, in partnership with the National Organization for Arts and Health. You can help others learn about the healing power of the arts by subscribing, sharing, and reviewing the podcast wherever you listen or watch. The podcast is hosted by Richard Wilmore, co-hosted by Constanza Rader. Our theme song, Songbird, is written and performed by Natalie Lane. Visit heartsneedart.org to learn how you can support our mission to create joy with people facing life-altering health challenges. Join us next week to learn more ways you can create arts for the health of it. The views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Hearts Need Art, their staff, board members, or other affiliates. All content is created for informational purposes only. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice or to diagnose and treat any health condition. Always seek advice of your physician or other qualified health professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast.